Namaste, everybody, and welcome to today's program, which is Managing the Pitta Dosha. I will be talking today for about 20 minutes about the Pitta Dosha and then answering questions. And you are welcome to submit your questions by typing them in, and my assistant will be giving me those questions to respond to toward the end of the program. So let's talk a little bit about Pitta Dosha. Pitta Dosha is first of all, it's one of the three doshas. For those of you that are less familiar with Ayurveda, the doshas are biophysical forces that govern the functionings of your body. Pitta dosha governs metabolism, basically, in your body, all the metabolic processes that, chemical processes that generate heat in the body. Elementally, we say that the Pitta dosha is made up of fire and water, but really it's mostly fire. And the texts are pretty clear about that. In fact, some texts will say that the Pitta dosha is entirely fire, and other texts say that it's fire with a little bit of water, because fire without a little bit of water will cause too much damage. So we say that the fire works within the water, and together they make up the Pitta dosha. That's the difference between Pitta dosha and Agni, or fire, is that Pitta dosha is the fire and the water. It's the container for the two of those. Now, being made up primarily of fire, Pitta dosha has certain qualities, and you have to understand the qualities in order to appreciate the functions of Pitta dosha in the body. The most important quality of Pitta dosha is that it's hot, is the quality of heat in the body. And it's because of that, when Pitta goes out of balance, we often see inflammation in the body. So inflammation is the primary sign that Pitta is vitiated or disturbed in the body. The text will also say that fever is a primary sign, and of course fever, excess heat in the body, another very important symbol or sign that Pitta is out of balance. But most of us don't walk around with fever, but we may be walking around with a Pitta imbalance. And so the heat of the body is generating inflammation, and where you have inflammation, you have Pitta that is vitiated. Pitta has other important qualities as well. For instance, Pitta is slightly moist because of the little bit of water that is present with the fire. So many times when we talk about Pitta, we talk about it being a little bit greasy or hot and greasy when the skin is overheated and a little bit oily. For instance, people might have a propensity toward acne. When acne is red and acne is inflamed, that's a good example of a Pitta imbalance in the body. And so oily skin that is overheated. Pitta is also mobile. Now, I say sort of mobile because really the force of mobility in the body is the element air. But Pitta also moves. That fire, that flame moves very easily. It's moved by the air. And so because of that, we say that Pitta really is unstable. And that's a better description of what Pitta is rather than mobile, because Pitta doesn't have its own force of motion. Rather, it's easily moved by the Vata dosha or by the air element. And so the Pitta dosha is unstable, which means that if there's any disturbance in the environment, then Pitta gets agitated. And you sometimes see people with a Pitta nature be more volatile, to be more emotional, be more intense, so that when things start getting a little, there's movement in the environment, change, challenge, they will get provoked by that. And that's the unstable quality of Pitta. And because of the heat, the way in which they get provoked is with heated emotions. And so they're prone to some anger and maybe some judgments, being overly critical. Those are some of the heated mental symptoms that occur when the unstable quality of Pitta is provoked. Pitta is also very sharp. It has a sharp quality to it. And so people with a more Pitta nature will tend to talk with a sharper tongue. The words that they'll use might be very pointed and very to the point, and maybe even have a sharp edge to it, so that it sounds as if they're attacking you. Or sounds as if they're being extremely, they want to make sure that they're extremely clear. And that type of a sharpness is typical of Pitta. It gives them, on the positive side, a very keen ability to communicate clearly. On the negative side, sometimes that communication can come off very intense. It can come off very judgmental, very arrogant, and that's the nature of Pitta. Now, Pitta has other important qualities too. Each of these qualities are part of what's called the Guruvadi Gunas. The Guruvadi Gunas are the 10 pairs of opposite qualities, and everything in nature shares these qualities. Everything is hot or cold, moist or dry, light or heavy, mobile or stable, sharp or dull, clear, cloudy, subtle, gross, hard, soft, rough, smooth, flowing, and dense. These are opposite pairs of qualities. So when you study Ayurveda, you study all of these qualities, and they give you the knowledge that you need in order to be able to identify the symptoms that are associated with Pitta and all of its signs in the body when a person's out of balance. But the key symptoms that I want you to focus on today is really the symptom of inflammation in the body and intensity in the mind. These are the two main characteristics that you see with people with Pitta imbalance, Pitta vitiation. When somebody has a Pitta constitution, it means they have the tendency toward those imbalances. When somebody has a Pitta imbalance, well, now they're actually manifesting it. The word for the imbalance is vikruti. So we say they have a Pitta vikruti, which means they have a disturbance in those qualities or in that dosha. When we say they have a Pitta prakruti or Pitta constitution, it means that they have a tendency toward those imbalances and that those tendencies are deeply set within the consciousness of that individual. They are created by the karma of that individual and creates tendencies called samskaras. And our constitution is a form of a samskara. It is establishing the tendencies that are going to manifest in our bodies and in our minds, in the biochemistry and biophysiology for how that is going to happen. Now, if you want to avoid a Pitta imbalance, the most important thing that you could do would be to avoid overheating. And in every way that you can avoid overheating, that is how you want to go about it. So for instance, staying out of the sun in the middle of the day when it is 95 degrees or 100 degrees, this would be a very wise choice for a person with a Pitta nature constitution or a Pitta imbalance to make, because they don't want to provoke that Pitta, knowing that that heat will build up in the body and produce more intensity, produce more inflammation in the body. So we can make choices with the understanding of our constitution to avoid excess heat. We might avoid going out in the middle of the afternoon or playing tennis or doing activities in the middle of the afternoon on those very, very hot days. Now, it's not just the air temperature, though, that will provoke Pitta. A person also needs to be conscious of what they eat. So avoiding hot, spicy food is very, very important. And we can keep it simple and just say, avoid all those hot spices. If when you put it in your mouth, it feels like it's tingling and it is making you sweat a little bit, well, then there's a good chance that that's aggravating your Pitta, and that should be avoided. So things like ginger, cayenne pepper, these are really good examples. Black pepper, those types of hot spices will tend to aggravate Pitta the most. Now, there's many, many spices, thousands of spices. And when we talk about spicy food, some people just mean flavorful food. And flavorful food is fine for a person of Pitta nature. There are many spices that are not hot spices. Spices that are famous in Ayurveda, like fennel, cumin, and coriander, are not that hot. And so they make food flavorful. Turmeric is a little warming, but it's also not that hot. And people of Pitta nature can utilize turmeric. In fact, turmeric has some very important benefits for reducing inflammation in the body. And so I don't really consider turmeric to be a problem for people with a Pitta nature. It is warming, but it's so slightly warming that it's really not that much of an issue. And if a person of Pitta nature is living a well-balanced life, then they can work with and tolerate many of those spicy foods that are not ultra hot. And that's important to know. We don't have to be literal and specific about every single spice that is categorized in Ayurveda as hot or warming and say, oh, it shouldn't be taken by Pitta. It really depends on how out of balance Pitta is, and it also depends upon the rest of the lifestyle of that person. But we do want to avoid the really hot, spicy foods. That's really important. And a lot of people like that. A lot of people like those hot mustards too. They love the feeling of the intensity of wasabi, and they will sprinkle hot sauce on just about everything, from their burritos to their eggs to everything else, because it gives them the sense of flavor. But we want to really, really recommend avoiding that for people with a Pitta nature or a Pitta intensity. So avoid those spices. Also avoid maybe even if there's one thing that's even more provoking than the hot spices, is when those hot spices are mixed with oil. That combination is just devastating for a person with a Pitta nature or a Pitta imbalance. So for instance, people who are having spicy pizza, as an example. Pizza tends to be very oily. It tends to have a lot of spices in it. And many people will even put some more hot spices onto it. The cheese melts and the cheese is very oily. If you're in New York, they're putting extra olive oil on the pizza. And the combination of the spice and the oil together really provokes the Pitta. Pitta is aggravated by the combination of heat with moisture. That's the combination that is the worst for a person of Pitta nature. So for instance, it would be worse to be in a hot, humid environment than in a hot, dry environment for a person of Pitta nature. Not that being in a hot, dry environment is all that good either. Heat is still very disturbing to the Pitta dosha, but I hope you get the point that when it's mixed with oil and it's mixed with moisture, that's going to be the worst combination of all. Now, people of Pitta nature should also pay attention to their overall environment and try to make sure that the environment is also not too hot. And so, for instance, when you think about your environment, I want you to think about your five senses and how you use those senses. So for instance, let's look at your sense of vision. Could you look at something that is hot? What does that mean to look at something that's hot? Well, maybe an obvious example would be if you had pictures on your wall of lava flowing out of the volcanoes of Hawaii. If you're a person of Pitta nature, that would not be good home decor, because that would continually provoke the Pitta, provoke the fire, because it is going to create that stimulation within you. You take it in through your eyes. The color red has a lot of fire in it, and orange has a lot of fire in it. And so you want to try to avoid an environment with too much bright color. Too much bright reds and bright oranges are going to be the most intense of all. But in fact, the bright color itself, any color that's very, very bright, even a cool color like blue, if it was a laser blue light, that intensity of light itself is fire. So the underlying element of all light is fire. And when fire becomes very, very bright, well, then that fire is going to be exacerbated. But the colors that aggravate it the most would be the reds and the oranges and maybe the yellow, especially if it's bright. So pay attention to your environment and try not to keep yourself in an environment that's too hot, and utilize colors that are going to be cooler. And the coolest colors are going to be colors like blue and white and brown. These colors are going to be very calming and soothing to the body and the mind of a person with a Pitta nature, so that it'll reduce inflammation and also reduce intensity. If that intensity gets out of control, it's going to lead to anger and being critical and volatile, all those things. So if you can create the environment that is going to balance you, you'll be more content, you'll be more happy, you'll be healthier as well. And so all of your senses are important. Think of sound as well, and what you're listening to with sound. If you're taking in sounds that are very intense, if you're listening to music with very angry lyrics, that anger has a hot quality to it. And so if you're taking in anger through your ears, that's going to provoke your own Pitta. You could think of abusive language as well. If you're in an environment where somebody is not speaking respectfully to you, that type of communication is very fiery, very heated, very critical. That's going to provoke your Pitta as well, increase your inflammation and increase your intensity. and so it's going to disturb your Pitta dosha. So you want to take in soothing sounds through your ears. The sounds of love is going to be the coolest sound of all, and it's going to be very, very satisfying to your heart, and it's going to cool down the heart and reduce inflammation. So when somebody says to you, "I love you," that is actually good medicine for inflammation. It's good medicine for intensity as well. You're just not as intense after somebody says, "I love you." So all the ways you can express love in the world will calm down the Pitta dosha, and all the ways you can receive love from the world will calm down the Pitta dosha. So love itself has a very cooling quality to it. So pay attention to what you're taking in through your ears. If you're getting involved in more esoteric arts, then you can learn about mantras that are very cooling as well. The bija mantra Lam and Vam are very cooling, as well as the bija mantras for the heart. Yum also very cooling. So these are things that you can work with. And so we've talked about the sense of sight and sound. Taste, we talked about the spices. Similar to love, think of love through taste as the sweet taste. When you take in the sweet taste, it's very, very cooling and satisfying to the body and to the mind. It's very cooling. It's made up of earth and water. Also, the bitter taste is very, very good for Pitta. In fact, many people say the bitter taste is best of all for Pitta because it's so cold and it's so dry. It's drier than the sweet taste. And so because it's cold and dry, it has the perfect qualities for antidoting Pitta. And so you can take herbs that are going to be bitters, or you can take food that is going to be more bitter. And that's great medicine for inflammation and great medicine for intensity, great medicine for Pitta overall. Aromas too, you can think about aromatherapy. Simple aromatherapy for balancing the Pitta dosha is to combine together sandalwood and rose. This is wonderful. It's such a beautiful aroma too. I mean, that's maybe one of the most joyful things about telling you that is when people wear the combination of sandalwood and rose. It is so nourishing and nurturing to the heart that it just cools down anger, and in the body it cools down inflammation. So you can make yourself a water spritzer, or you can take the essential oil and put it in a diffuser, and that's a wonderful way to cool down the Pitta dosha. Of course, there's so many other essential oils, and we're not going to spend too much time on it. In fact, I'm only going to take a couple of more minutes, and then I'm going to take your questions. And my assistant is gathering your questions together, and then I'm going to take your questions directly live here. So you can type those in if you have any questions, and Jeanette's going to bring them to me in just a few minutes. So when we think about Pitta, we want to make sure that we're treating the body properly through the five senses, and we're also treating the mind properly. In fact, the senses, other than the sense of taste, have the strongest impact on the mind entirely. In other words, the way your mind is going to function depends a lot on what you see, what you smell, and what you hear. So pay close attention to that if you are caring for the mind, and pay close attention to your diet if you're caring for the body. Of course, they all affect body and mind, but they just have a stronger action on one or the other. I'll share with you another thing that you can do in order to cool down the Pitta dosha, and that is a breathing practice. And so when we talk about breathing practices in Ayurveda, this is called pranayama. Pranayama means learning how to control or to restrain the breath. And when you learn to control the breath properly, you can affect the heat or cooling in your body. And so there is a form of pranayama called lunar pranayama that I want to share with you. And lunar pranayama is a way of cooling down the mind. And it draws, for those of you with a little more yoga background, it draws the prana into the Ida Nadi. And the Ida Nadi is very cooling. And it increases the qualities of water, which is the soft quality, and the cool quality, which is very good in the mind for cooling down that criticalness and that intensity. So what you do is you inhale through the left nostril and you exhale through the right nostril. Inhale left nostril, exhale right nostril. It looks like this. You take your hands into a chin mudra, into Vishnu mudra, and you take your thumb and you bring it to your right nostril and inhale. You're closing your right nostril, so you're inhaling left. You then exhale right. And then you close your right again and you inhale left and you exhale right. And you do this with just a gentle pause between the inhalation and the exhalation. You don't want to retain the breath because that's going to be very cooling. And just sit quietly. And this is a beautiful way to, I call it pre-meditation, because it's going to calm you down like meditation will calm you down, but it's giving you something to do at the same time, which is to control your breathing, which is a great focus point for your mind. So you begin to settle down, and at the same time, it's having this effect on the nadi in your body, and that's going to cool things down quite a bit as well. When it comes to managing your pitta, the most important thing that you can do, though, more important than anything else, is going to be to work at the level of consciousness, because it's consciousness that ultimately impacts the mind, and the mind that impacts the body. When we talk about cultivating your consciousness to control pitta, what we really mean is cultivating sattva. A sattvic lifestyle is a lifestyle that is calm, that is clear, and is a way of living that keeps your mind at peace. And so practices like yoga and meditation are going to be very, very sattvic. And if you're practicing those practices, that alone is going to go a long way to controlling your pitta, to preventing your pitta to going out of balance. In fact, if you're doing meditation every morning, the choices you make the rest of your day are going to be more harmonious as well. I like to say that where there's harmony, there's health, and where there's disharmony, there is disease. And so if you are meditating in the morning, starting your morning off like that, the rest of your day will be more harmonious, and you will be more likely to choose foods that are balanced for you, more likely to choose music that is balanced for you, and to look upon sights that are balanced for you, less likely to engage in conflict. It's just because you started your day with meditation and you're calm and you're clear. And then you want to continue that as a way of being throughout the day. So when you have your meals, meditate before your meals. Say a little grace, give a little thanks, acknowledge the food and the prana in the food. By taking the time to do that, you're also going to be keeping your mind and your heart clear, and you're going to be making healthier choices throughout the course of your day. So all of that is very important. Let's see, other things that you can do in terms of your lifestyle for pitta is to make sure that you get a good night's rest. Sleep is so important. It's one of the 3 pillars of life. If you're not sleeping well, then your vata becomes disturbed, and that air pushes your pitta out of balance. And so sleep is so important. So it's important to get to bed before 10 o'clock. That's going to be important. When you get to bed after 10 o'clock, it starts to become more difficult to sleep. Everything starts to become more active. There are cycles in the body of vata and pitta and kapha. And these cycles will also provoke the pitta. So after 10 o'clock at night, pitta starts to kick in. And for a person of pitta nature, they're going to start feeling warmer. It's going to be more difficult to sleep. The mind is going to become more active with problem solving. And so a good night's sleep is really important. All right, at this time, what I want to do is begin to take some of your questions, and my assistant just brought some of them in. And so the first question is, what would one find out if he or she has Pitta Dosha? What are the symptoms? Well, the main symptoms I've already mentioned are inflammation and fever, in the mind, intensity. For instance, when you want to get from point A to point B in the shortest amount of time, and you don't have any room for flexibility, pitta is disturbed. When you start getting intense about things, even if you're right, pittas often think they're right when they're intense, because they see things the way they do, and they're trying to get to their goal. When you're too overly focused on goals, when that becomes all important, that you get more and more and more intense, well, your pitta is getting disturbed. Now, you might be right, but you're also going to have inflammation. You might be right, but you're also going to have the symptoms of being more critical, more angry. And so all of those are symptoms of Pitta Dosha. In the skin becomes red when your Pitta is vitiated. The red and the heat in the skin could make skin conditions worse. The eyes could become red as well. You can get redness in your eyes. You can get burning in your urinary system, and so you can have some burning urination. These are all signs of inflammation in the body. The eyes become red when they're inflamed. The urine burns when it's inflamed. Even their blood vessels can become inflamed, and that can contribute to heart disease. So inflammation is at the root of so many of the problems that Pitta has, and on the physical level, all the symptoms of burning in the body. But what kind of tea do you recommend to calm down Pitta Dosha? Well, the best tea to take for calming down Pitta Dosha would be anything that is bitter, anything with a bitter taste. So if you want to go with just very common things that are in the marketplace, you can find dandelion tea in the marketplace. It's so readily available. You can buy it, either already in tea bags. You can buy it in bulk. And dandelion tea is wonderful for Pitta. It's a bitter with a slight sweetness to it. That's going to be a great ongoing beverage tea. It's also very good for one of Pitta's home sites, which is in the liver. It's going to keep your liver healthy. It's going to keep your blood healthy. Dandelion happens to be one of my favorite herbs. But other herbs in that category include burdock root is very good. Gentian is very good. The Indian herb kutki is very good. There are so many wonderful bitter herbs out there, and you can mix them together. How do you know the flow of Vata? How do we know the flow of Vata, Pitta, and Kapha? Well, I'm not really sure what that question is asking about, but when we think of the flow of Vata and Pitta and Kapha, we generally think of Kapha as beginnings of cycles. So for instance, when you wake up in the morning, Kapha is the beginning of your morning from 6 o'clock to 10 o'clock. Kapha is more increased at that time. And then we move from Kapha time into Pitta time. So Kapha flows into Pitta, and from 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock we have the Pitta time. And it's at that time of day the sun is at its peak, and that's when your Pitta is going to be most naturally increased, and you're more likely at that time to be able to focus and get things done. But maybe if you're overly focused, you're going to provoke your Pitta. One of the factors that can provoke your Pitta. And from there we go into the Vata period of time, and that flows after that. All right. Now the next question is, let's see, I just got another note here of questions. How does the actual temperature of food play into Pitta Dosha? Can you have a mixture of cooler and colder foods with warmer temperatures? That's a good question. Anytime you cook food, you're going to make it warmer. So if you have a Pitta imbalance, you might want to consider a period of time of having raw foods that are not cooked, because those raw foods tend to, in terms of preparation, those raw foods will tend to have a cooler effect on the body. But there's the energy of the food and there's the energy of how it's prepared, and you have to consider both of those. So there are foods that have their own energy separate from how it was cooked. So for instance, a spice like ginger, even if it's not cooked, if you take it in your mouth, it's hot. All right, and then if you cook that ginger, now you're adding the heat of cooking into the heat of ginger, and that now becomes even hotter. So we have to look at food preparation as well as the actual energetics of the food, and so you have to pay attention to that. If you have a Pitta imbalance, you want to pay attention to both. All right, I got another question here. My daughter is predominantly Pitta, and she will be going away to college next fall, going away from home. She does yoga and meditation occasionally, but are there other simple ways that she could stay in balance and she won't be in complete control of her living space, her meals, etc.? Boy, what a great question. And so beautiful that she's been brought up with Ayurveda, and she's been brought up with yoga, and she is meditating and doing yoga. Now she's going to be going off on her own. Now she's on her own, and all the training you've given her, well, now she's an adult. Now she's going to go into the world, and she's going to find out who she is. And part of who she is how she is in the world. And she's going to be exploring that. And she's probably going to have time periods where she moves away from her practices and time periods where she comes back to her practices. And my prediction would be that as she gets older and older, she will come back to her root training and make that a deeper and deeper and deeper part of her life. But what could she do? Well, I would recommend that she develop community in her college. That's the first thing she do, is develop community of individuals who are also into Ayurveda and into yoga, so that she's around more sattvic people and she's around people who are making healthier choices and will support her decision to meditate. So while other kids are going off to party, maybe she wants to go out with her friends to a place in nature by a river and go sit on a rock and meditate for the afternoon and really deepen her practices. And maybe they want to go to a yoga class. And in that way, she will be able to stay connected to her sattva and make healthier choices throughout the course of her time there. And then she's more likely to wake up and maybe do some abhyanga in the morning and do her neti practices and do all the different things that she's learned for taking care of herself. We don't have too much time left, so I'll take maybe one more question here. There's one more. How do I balance if I'm equally Pitta and Vata, especially regarding temperature? Well, you have your constitution, your prakriti, your tendencies, and then you also have your imbalance, which is your vikriti. It is more important that you pay attention to your imbalances than your prakriti. It's more important than what is the current state of these doshas right now, and make your choices accordingly. So the question really is, do you have a Vata imbalance or a Pitta imbalance, or do you have both of those being out of balance? When Vata and Pitta combine together in an imbalance, the heat wins out and a person becomes hot. They also tend to become dry and remain very mobile. So you want to use the opposite qualities for a Pitta-Vata imbalance. So you want to become more still, you want to become more cool, and you want to become more moist. And by doing that, you'll balance both Pitta and the Vata dosha. Now, your situation may be a little bit more different. Everybody's is. That's a basic approach. Seeing an Ayurvedic practitioner, an Ayurvedic doctor or counselor would be the way to get the best personal advice that you can for your situation. I just want to end by letting you know that if you're interested in studying Ayurveda at the college, leave your email in the comments below. If you would like to be contacted, we'll reach out to you. One of our staff will get together with you. I want to just thank you, whether you're going to study Ayurveda or not study Ayurveda here at the college. I want to thank you for taking care of yourself, for living a life in harmony. When we are all here on the planet living a life in harmony, we will be living in a very loving place. And that's the most important thing to me, is that we all go out into the world and that we live the principles of Ayurveda. We live the principles of yoga. And when we do that, we're going to be kind to each other. We're going to be loving to each other. We're going to be peaceful with each other. We're going to be respectful with each other. We're going to touch all of the different facets of love. And when we live that way, we will truly be living in a heaven on earth. Now, I know as a planet, we are a long way away from that. But it begins one person at a time. It begins with you and it begins with me. So let's do what we can do to live in balance, to live harmoniously, and to live lovingly. Many blessings to you as you continue your journey. I'll just end by chanting Om and 3 Shantis. Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om, peace, peace, peace. Many blessings, everybody. Have a beautiful day and a healthy life. Namaste.